you decide, no, I do not want to KYC AML checks, we can participate in.
Well, why do we want to tokenize them if it's only on our private blockchain?
Can all be tokenized.
Welcome, man. How are you doing?
How are you, man? Good, Carlos.
How are you? We always do this. Which is kind of awkward, but like it looks nice on the camera. Welcome to Real World Value Podcast, where we discuss the universal economy that's developing thanks to RWAs and retail-facing applications in Web3. Obviously, honored to have someone from Chainlink here. A pleasure to meet you in person after chatting on Telegram for so long. Want to tell us a bit about what your role is in Chainlink?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carlos. So I've been at Chainlink for 4 years plus. Largely my role I wear two hats. So I'm leading up mainly our cross-chain go-to-markets of house at Chainlink, but also like strategic partnerships alongside with new partners within the Web3 space as well.
All right, brilliant. And when I was thinking about like how to cover this podcast, because obviously Chainlink is such an ubiquitous monster in the industry, I was thinking like a great way to do it would be like in sections, so everyone sort of knows about oracles, and to a large degree thanks to Chainlink, because obviously you guys were like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to, in the best way possible, I mean it, when it comes to oracles. This idea that like tokenized assets needed like real-time feeds and so on. But ever since, you guys have done many more things, including the cross-chain part. So I thought we could, before returning to oracles, we could first explore that cross-chain part and then look at the RWA side of things for Chainlink. So how did you guys took things from oracles to cross-chain to begin with?
Yeah, good point. I think I'll take a step back, and how we look at this entire landscape has been, we came into the market and look at where the problem statements are. So when we first launched on mainnet back in 2019 of June, right, we looked at the space and we were like, okay, back then, DeFi, there was after ICO phase, right? People were trying to do more within the blockchain space, but blockchains are really just ledgers, like general ledgers.
Yeah.
Where what we are trying to do is how do we enable more useful, what we termed back then as hybrid smart contracts, right? Where you pull forth data from external systems, right? And then you can do more on the blockchain, meaning you can bring forth more data on the blockchain beyond just crypto native assets. And if you look at like DeFi markets, right, we looked into the space. There were many different security incidents with regards to DeFi protocols, with lending protocols back in the day, right, with things like flash loan attacks and whatnot. So we decided, okay, the best path here and where the user need is they need price feeds, right? They need crypto prices where now instead of like what you have for equities, right, where it's only traded on one specific market, with crypto prices, you have like hundreds of different exchanges, right? Then the question is, how do you get like global state price of the particular asset? So that was why we decided to focus on price feeds, right? But the underlying technology is a decentralized oracle network. And one big question is, what exactly is an oracle, right? Most people think of oracle as price feeds, but no, that's not the case, right? Oracles is really bringing external data into the blockchain, right? If you think about cross-chain, what exactly is cross-chain? Cross-chain is one, let's say, for example, like Ethereum. Ethereum, it has its own general ledger, meaning whatever happens within Ethereum, it knows. Whatever happens outside of Ethereum, it doesn't know. Doesn't matter whether it's a external Web2 data source or whether it's another blockchain, like, for example, let's say BNB chain, right? So what we are trying to do here is, in the cross-chain aspect, it's also similarly bringing external data onto the blockchain. Just that in this case, you are validating, let's say, a cross-chain bridging transaction, right? You are validating that a user has performed X transaction on BNB, and then you're sending that message over to Ethereum so that people know that, let's say, a token has been locked or a token has been burned on BNB, and therefore you're able to mint X amount of token on Ethereum. So we see it as the same problem statement, right? It's all about bringing forth more data onto the blockchain so you can grow the market size, right? Addressable market in general. And in this case, we looked at, okay, back in the day, 2019, there were really only Ethereum that had a lot of like DeFi use cases. Fast forward 3 to 4 years later, right? Really more so in 2021, 2022, right? Where you would see more and more. Back then, it was the odd L1 wars, if you remember, right?
Yeah.
So with chains like Avalanche popping up, etc., and growing out an entire ecosystem, then more and more dApps as well as assets, they want to interact across the different chains. And that's where we see back then, there was another problem statement. So price feeds was kind of like solved, right? There were less and less security incidents, but we see more and more of security incidents in the bridging space. And that's where we started thinking, okay, if we want to solve this problem, let's use our existing decentralized Oracle network technology because it's been better tested and proven, and now use it in the case for cross-chain messages as well.
Yeah, I like how you cover the entire history as very, very educational. Can you, for those people that might not be too aware, can you cover like a little bit of what these incidents in cross-chain were usually?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it back in the day when, and that's the fascinating thing that I think, like I really admire about this industry that we're in, right? Is the pace of innovation is like very, very quick, right? People iterate, experiment on chain, and that's really what kicked off the DeFi summer back in the day. So when you look at like DeFi summer, right, what actually really happened? You see the advancements of lending protocols, right? So back then, it was Compound, right? And then therefore Aave back then was called ETHLend. They came on board, right? They were trying to build lending markets. If you remember back in the day, it was Cream Finance, etc. Right?
Yeah. Maker was very big as well.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So with those lending protocols, what they were struggling and trying to solve for is they want to have assets listed as collateral, right, onto their debt so that people can borrow liquidity out of which, right? So let's say I deposit ETH, right, or Bitcoin, right, BTC, and I want to borrow out like a USDC or USDT, etc., some stable coins, right? The question is always, how exactly do you price the collateral, right? So back then, there wasn't, before Chainlink came forth, right, most people were using DEX prices. So like take a Uniswap time-weighted average, TWAP, right, and then use that to calculate. The problem with TWAP, there's two problems, right? TWAP typically is either a lagging indicator. If you want to do like a, for example, like a 15 minutes, 30 minutes TWAP, is a lagging indicator, so it's not efficient, right?
Yeah.
Or TWAP, if you do like a, for example, like a 30 seconds TWAP or like 1 minute TWAP, what happens is that it's easy for things like a flash loan attack to occur.
Exactly.
So that's really what we have seen back then. DeFi protocols were struggling with this problem, right? Security incidents, meaning funds were lost, right? Through this phase of experimentation, because what one can do is they can basically manipulate the price of the collateral, right, significantly in a single block, right? And then therefore tricking the lending protocol to thinking that the value of the user's collateral has significantly increased and therefore is able to borrow, let's say, 70% of its underlying collateral. So instead of my collateral being $100, let's say through a flash loan attack, my collateral is now worth $1 million.
And you can take out like a 500,000 loan. Yeah.
So that wrecked a lot of protocols, like lending protocols back then. So what we have seen, and the demand was very high back then. So we work alongside with Compound, work alongside with, back then was ETHLend. Now we know as Aave, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what kind of like took rise and enabled the DeFi industry to mature. Now you hardly ever see flash loan attacks really occurring. DeFi lending protocols have been very secure. Like Aave has never had an incident, right? And that's one of the key reasons with this Lindy, right? And having a track record of not having any incidents, people were more comfortable to park like large amount of assets. I think
Totally, and institutions as well. Like lately, you see very little like lending protocols like featuring in Rect. Like that doesn't really happen as much anymore. You're right.
Yeah, so I think that's a natural phase of a maturing of an industry. We iterate and experiment from there very early on. And then when we get product market fit, that's where we then realize, okay, hold on, these are some of the problems that we need to solve for, right? So to enable the industry to kick forth to a stage of, instead of a 0 to 10, now I want to scale from a 10 to 100. The problem statements are very different, right? And that's where I think at the end state, security is key, because back to our initial point of why we think decentralized Oracle networks are very essential. There's only a very, like, DeFi protocols cannot work unless you have external data that's brought onto the system. And that's why oracles are so critical and important to the entire DeFi landscape.
Right. No, that's again very comprehensive. So when it comes to facilitating cross-chain security and so on, a lot of people might not also be too aware of CCIP. So can we just quickly cover what CCIP is? Because we're going to constantly be referring to it across this conversation. So just so people have like a point of reference for it.
Yeah, indeed. So CCIP basically stands for Cross-Chain Interoperability Protocol, right? It's a bit of a tongue twister here. So what it really does, you can think of it as a fundamental, like a messaging layer. So when you want to interact across multiple different blockchains, right, how do you do that? So there's a whole wealth of different use cases that this can empower. So it's mainly for developers to code within their code base to interact between various different chains, right? So this can be simple things like bridging funds, right? Like sending a token from chain A to chain B, but it can also be complex use cases. For example, like if I want to do like a cross-chain staking, if I want to do cross-chain rewards distribution, if I want to do like a cross-chain CDP, right, or cross-chain liquidations, that's really what CCIP helps to power, because a developer can use CCIP to code on one chain and interact across multiple different ecosystems, meaning now the smart contracts on Arbitrum and the smart contracts on Optimism or Ethereum can all talk to one another. Same thing even for non-EVMs, like we recently launched on Solana as well as Aptos, so a Rust-based language as well as a Move-based language, right? And we're constantly expanding to more and more non-EVMs out there as well. And it's not just on the EVM side, meaning regardless of what type of underlying language that the smart contract is built out of, now developers can use CCIP to talk to all the different contracts across different type of ecosystems. So you can build like a all-in-one app that targets basically all of the users across the board.
Beautiful. And yeah, I think when it comes to solutions like that, obviously you're ideally invisible to the user. So a lot of people underestimate like the work that goes into a project like Chainlink to get adoption of this. And it's often like more of people such as yourself, like going and talking to other projects, like trying to get integrations going. You obviously are starting to see that more apps intend to be chain agnostic or chain abstracted. You have a lot more of use cases that need stablecoins and stablecoins that live in different chains. So when it comes to that, when it comes to this evolution and to the growing need of things to be multi-chain or chain abstracted at all times, what have you guys seen when it comes to that industry evolution? Like how do you think of what your role is right now and what the next step would be once you fulfill that role?
Yeah, absolutely. So you brought up a good point. On our end, how we really think of this entire landscape is, I think we have first started off with DeFi was a POC, right? And maybe I'll take a step back. The way that you think about cross-chain, it's very similar to, for example, like in the traditional finance space, right? If you think about how banks all talk to one another. So when you have a bank account in Bank A and I have a bank account in Bank B, right? The banks don't really talk to one another, meaning it has its own like a general ledger, right? Of all your customer deposits, the loans that you have taken up through the bank, credit cards, etc., right? Transactions and whatnot. Similar to mine, I have like my list of all my deposits, withdrawals,
Customers.
right? It's all on my bank,
Yeah.
right? But what if I want to do like a payment to you, right? Then that's where the bank need to talk to one another, right? And they use what we term as Swift, right? Which is the messaging layer, right? Across multiple different banks so that banks can talk to one another. So in our case, we see the same in the blockchain space, meaning now in the case for banks, it was chains, right? But ultimately speaking, does the end user really know what's happening under the hood when the banks talk to one another?
Not really.
Yeah, I just care on the front end that I'm sending my funds to you. You would see it in ideally a few hours' time, right? Or let's say a cross-border transaction might take a few days, right?
Yeah.
But ideally speaking, it's all abstracted away from the end user. It's actually more of like a B2B type solution. So similarly for CCIP, right? Our goal here is to become invisible or transparent to the end user, because our goal here is to enable builders that they can build like basically very useful cross-chain applications, right? Via CCIP, they can bridge in and out of different chains, but have the underlying security assumption that it will not have any form of risk factors, right? Meaning I wouldn't fret when I'm sending funds over to you, I wouldn't fret that my funds will be lost, right? So this is the same thing. I think right now we are still in very early stages given the security incidents that we've been seeing on the bridging side of house. So there's a bit more anxiety, right? When I do like a bridging transaction and abstract everything to the end user. But ideally, once the industry matures, right, and with CCIP, when there's no security incidents at all, that's where the trust layer would start building up on that front.
All right.
So that's the way that we see it. And in terms of like the future trajectory of how things is going to be, right? First, now we see it with chains, right? And it's still very simple bridging transactions. But what we are trying to do now, as well as beyond chains, meaning it can be public chains that we know now. It can also be private chains, right? That we've been working alongside with institutions for, right? But this can also be like on the app layer, right? They interact with not just bridging transactions, but they interact with reading states on one chain and executing a state on another chain altogether.
What kind of project or what kind of company has a private chain, and what do they use it for typically in your experience?
Yeah, I think on our side, there is a couple of different kind of profiles that would want private chains, which typically is when we work alongside with, so we've been working alongside Swift since 2019, right? So it has been years, right, in the making. And through that, we have built relationships with multiple different institutions and financial institutions, capital markets players out there as well, right? And through that, they have a much tighter security kind of requirement, right? And they have to account for basically regulators and compliance type of requirements. So with that, that's where they will want control over having like a permission chain or like a private chain where they can tokenize products and whatnot, but they will also want distribution channels, right? They need a public chain to settle, right? They need a public chain to do like cross-banking transactions, etc. Right? So that's really where mostly on the private chain side of house we do see it coming from institutions out there.
I think this is a very interesting thing for people to know, because we hear about all these like funds and firms that have their own tokenized assets, that have their own like private blockchains, but they only use it within themselves. And like your average person on crypto Twitter doesn't really know what goes on in there. So let's say I am an institution. Let's say, and to a degree I also don't know. Let's say I am an institution. Particle Network is an institution, and we own, I don't know, a bunch of like private debt, a bunch of bonds, bunch of stocks, whatever. We tokenize them. Why do we want to tokenize them if it's only on our private blockchain?
Yeah, you make a good point. So I think on that end, tokenizing is not the end state, is not the goal. So tokenizing only is the first step of the multiple steps, right? To get to the end state of on what we term as a global financial network, right? So how we see this entire space is the blockchain is a great technology And the reason why institutions are keen on the blockchain is because it can quicken settlement times.
Exactly.
Right?
And save a ton of costs.
Absolutely. So the reason why they want a private chain is mainly because they need control and they need to account for regulators, right? Anything that happens, think of it right now. Anything that happens within a bank, back then, it was under their general ledger system.
Basically a giant spreadsheet, yeah.
Indeed. So right now, it's just going to be the same, where they are tokenizing. I mean, this can be various different things. Different banks have like different phases of innovation, right? Of where they are. So on one end, it could be tokenizing customer deposits, right? And that is kept all within their private chain. If it's interactions that is solely just on between their chain and customer base, right? It will all be within that private chain. But if they need to do like a cross-border payment or like a cross-banking transaction, right, with another bank, where another bank has a private chain, where are they going to settle? They need a intermediary public chain to settle. Right, so that's where I guess public chains come in. Right, blockchains leverage allows the interoperability, and that's where CCIP comes in.
Right. Yeah.
Like having a private chain as an isolated island is not like useful enough. They need to interact with various different chains out there. Be it so we term it as bank chain A, you are bank chain B, right? And if bank chain A wants to interact with bank chain B, it can interact either directly. Or let's say if we decide, hey, I don't really trust your chain.
Yeah,
you don't
I don't
really
want
trust
you to
my
be
chain.
putting stuff in my ledger.
Yeah. So we will all go to Ethereum, right? Or Solana or some of the other chains out there, right? And settle on that chain. And then after it's being settled on that chain, let's say I have USDC, right? You have the tokenized green bond that I want to buy, right? We all send it to let's say Ethereum or Solana. We make the transaction for the swap on Ethereum or Solana, and then after that, you will get the USDC back onto your private chain. I will get the tokenized green bond back on my private chain. So that's the way of how we see this entire intersection flow. And what that really means is that now we are using the blockchain space as a global financial system where you can do cross-border payments, right, counterparty transactions, etc.
Settle very quickly. Yeah. Just like your average crypto transaction of me sending my friend 10 USDT, but like at cross banks and
Absolutely.
powered by CCIP to settle this.
That's actually what we have done with recently we announced earlier this year with Ondo and JP Morgan. Right. So what we have done is we have done a DVP transaction via our next DVP, delivery versus payment transaction, right? Via our next, so we are working on the next generation of the Chainlink network, which is basically what we term as a Chainlink runtime environment. So you can think of like JavaScript runtime environment.
Right.
In a similar case, Chainlink runtime environment is basically enabling, like instead of right now, the way that our Chainlink Oracle networks are constructed is constructed based on products. Right? Think of it like you have price feeds, you have cross-chain, etc. With a Chainlink runtime environment, what actually happens is now you can do very customized workflow, right? You read on one chain, you write on another chain, do some compute, off-chain compute, etc. And these are all powered by separate decentralized Oracle networks within the tech stack. So as a developer, it's very easy for me to build an entire workflow right now via this Chainlink runtime environment. So we did exactly that between JP Morgan and Ondo. So JP Morgan has their own private chain called Kinexys, right? Ondo has their own chain as well. And we have done a transaction between Kinexys and Ondo with JP Morgan customer deposits, right? Making a transaction to buy a particular asset that is on Ondo chain as well.
All right. I think like when at the beginning, a lot of people would hear RWAs and wouldn't think of these type of assets. They wouldn't think of these type of like very much like obtuse is not the word, abstract financial instruments that institutions such as JP Morgan has and which Ondo uses in their own way to put to the more of the service of other types of clients in the crypto market and outside of it. Then like people, when we started hearing RWAs, like the big example was always gold, right? The big example was always like stuff like carbon credits, stuff like stocks, which are like more tangible, and people have a more immediate idea of what it is to trade these things, or what their role is in the world. In your way you understand things as Chainlink, what's the roadmap been for these RWA and ongoing tokenization of assets been like? Like, obviously stablecoins are a big first, like tokenizing fiat currency makes a lot of sense. But have you guys got any surprises when it comes to how things have evolved in terms of like, okay, I didn't think this was going to be the next thing, and now like it sort of looks like this and this and that and that?
Surprises, not really. What we have been encouraged by is the pace of innovation, right? And the adoption cycles within the capital market side. And I think this has been like a huge encouragement. I think all across the entire industry in terms of builders out there for regulatory clarity that we see right now in across the globe, but more so in the US.
Of course.
Right. So with that enabled like builders to be and also like a stamp of approval for financial institutions to really do more, right? With regards to leveraging the blockchain technology. So if you look at like RWA.xyz, you look at all the different RWAs that's being tokenized right now. So you're right.
With different approaches as well.
Yeah. Stablecoins is by far the first product market fit, right? And then if you look into like the different type of RWAs that's being created, you have basically US government T-bills, right? You have, which makes sense. You do have like gold, right? Commodities, right? Very recently, we see more and more stocks that's coming up. Like X stocks is coming up, right? And I think you would see more and more of those with Kraken and whatnot, right? People are trying to bring on board stocks and even pre-IPO stocks, right?
Yeah.
On-chain, right? And that's a huge positive, right? And what we have also seen with regards and what we have done with banks since last year was bringing money market funds on-chain as well.
Okay.
So with regards to like, if you talk about like accessibility to the much wider public, it will be mimicking whatever that you see right now in terms of where liquidity is in the traditional financial system, right? And which you look at it is mainly derivatives, stocks, commodities. It could be real estate, right, out there. And what we are trying to do right now is working alongside those partners to bring all of that on-chain. Because that's how we're going to get liquidity in. And our whole industry is going to grow because of which. Right, and the question would be, how do we, when we bring those assets in, how do we value those assets? How do we solve for compliance-related issues, right? So that it can account back to regulators. So it's not as easy as just simply tokenizing and creating a smart contract that represents an underlying asset that's locked up in a bank account, etc. Right? It is not that simple, right? We work alongside with them, right? Get onboarded. Like recently, all of our products are certified ISO 2071, right? 27001, as well as SOC 2 compliant. And the reason why we did that was mainly these are the rails that's needed so that institutions can start using these technologies within their system. Right. So what we're trying to do here is we think that this current crypto industry is still very nascent. DeFi was a POC where we envision this industry to grow from the 0 to 10. Now we're trying to scale it up from the 10 to 100. And that's really where you need to onboard more real world assets. And that's where what I was saying earlier, where if you look at what real world assets there are right now, it can all be tokenized, right? On-chain. Right, and we would see more and more of those with especially like rails that we have done with. We have this automated compliance engine, right? That we have done, right? Smart contracts that is able to read the net asset value data of the particular real world asset, write it on chain, put it in a digital transfer agency smart contract that is able to be funneled and pulled directly from the issuer itself so they can report back to the regulators. So this is like one whole entire workflow and system that we have all built in place, working alongside with the institutions to get more and more assets on board.
How big do you think the gap is between, because you mentioned DeFi a couple times, and we've obviously focused a lot of institutions. How big do you think the gap is between like institutionally minted assets to anyone in the world? Like, let's say your institution tokenizes a bit of real estate. Obviously, the big Ethereum vision was always, maybe this is a bit naive, but the vision, especially regulatorily wise, but the big vision was always that anyone in the world will be able to have that asset and trade it and, equal opportunity and access to this kind of thing. How big do you think the gap is between issuing these assets to anyone in the world having them, to them being like interoperable with the DeFi ecosystem that we know and what we currently call DeFi?
The first step is always going to be tokenizing it.
Yeah.
So that's the first step, right? Now, after that you tokenize it, then you're right. Next is how do you get, and the whole reason why banks do want to tokenize is they also see it as an additional, it's a business segment.
It's a global opportunity.
Indeed. And if you look into like the current generation, of investors, right, of the retail market out there, is all going to be using blockchain, right, technologies. So what we are trying to do here, and the reason why they're trying to do here is they are trying to be relevant, right, to the existing user base in the next generation of investors, and that will be their clients, right? So blockchain is the way to reach them. So with that, once they tokenize the assets, now is a question of, okay, how do we enable more people so that this acts as a distribution arm for me to get my money market fund, right, or my tokenized stocks or whatnot, right, to be readily bought by anyone else. But they still have to resolve for compliance-related stuff, right? So that's where we are coming in with the automated compliance engine, right? There will be certain applications, and in my opinion, DeFi applications, that will have so-called what we term as whitelisted functionalities.
Yeah.
So there will be DeFi application that's fully permissionless. There will be DeFi applications that would say, hey, you have to do some form of KYC, right? And AML checks before you can buy this particular asset and interact with this particular DeFi protocol that allows you to, for example, let's say deposit your tokenized stocks and get liquidity out of this particular lending protocol. I mean, we have seen that with Aave, with Aave Horizon out there, where if you have been following, they're also creating like another version of lending protocol that's specifically for real world assets.
Yes.
Right. Which is basically like a kind of like a whitelisted gated lending platform. So I think that there will be back to the and that's how we think of the world, right? Blockchains, when we created it, was freedom of access.
Yeah.
Everyone has the freedom to make choices.
And
right?
even to secure the network, to participate in it, to get rewarded for sustaining the network.
Absolutely. So what we're providing here is a choice, right? Some people look at KYC, AML, and they're like, that's not the ethos of Web3. I beg to differ, right? If you look at like KYC, AML, right, what we are trying to do in Web3 is giving people the choice. If you want to get access to this particular asset, it's your choice to do KYC and AML. You make the decision. If you decide, no, I do not want to KYC and AML checks, you can participate in the other type of products that's available on chain. But ultimately, it's going to be a choice, right? You're going to have like a whole list of different products that is on chain, and it's going to be your choice whether you want to access this product with this particular requirements, access product B with this particular requirements. So that's really how we grow this entire industry.
Do you think for average people, the opportunity is going to be largely the same, or is it going to be bigger? Like, let's say you're Carlos in Mexico and you're 15 years old and you just read, like, I was making this example yesterday with centrifugal. I think it's good, so I'm not sticking with it. If you've listened to both episodes, and you read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and the whole thing says you have to invest money. So
Yeah.
you're looking on the internet to how you should invest, and it says you should buy a couple of stocks, indexes every year and whatever, and don't look at it in 10 years. And you're effectively locked out of the US markets, right? Because like you're outside of it. Do you think the impact for people that are outside of this financial ecosystem is going to be very big thanks to these things?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at like the whole benefit of blockchain is that it's a global system, right? It's a permissionless system. Anyone from any country can go to a smart contract and interact with that smart contract, right? So if you look into like the existing rails out there, it's very difficult for a non-US resident to get exposure into, for example, things like US stocks, right? And even if you want, for example, things like money market funds and whatnot, there are certain requirements that you only, for example, let's say high net worth individuals can get access to.
Or accredited
right?
investors, yeah.
Indeed. And it's a whole long list of different requirements and you need like the different networks and whatnot. Once those assets are brought on chain, right? While you need to do, for example, like things like KYC, AML checks, which is standard, right? But it's going to be a lot easier in terms of getting exposure to those assets versus the traditional rails that you have right now. So that's really what we envision, right? I mean, honestly, if you just look at like DeFi, right? You look at what happened with Axie Infinity back in the day, where like people in Philippines, like gamers in Philippines, can use it to make a living, right? People in Nigeria, people in Argentina can get exposure to Bitcoin, right? And I think that's the key thing, right? Now we are opening access to a much wider global pool. As long as you have an internet, you can get exposure to this different type of products, right? And obviously, because now you have like a whole suite of different products, there might be some products that would still be ring fenced to certain people with certain requirements. But the amount of products that you are exposed to now is not, you're not bound by geographical boundaries and constraints anymore.
And one point I've been making a lot on this podcast is what I call the universal economy. This happens when like all these assets are brought on chain and a lot of that becomes permissionless. A lot of that becomes sort of permission through KYC AML, like you say, but it's more accessible in general. So then effectively you have like your meme coins and your tokenized whatever any startup in the world decided to try and tokenize, and like you get like a lot of random shit trading alongside the US dollar, tokenized Nvidia stocks, like all these very serious instruments and all these very serious things. They're all basically on the same ledger. So it all becomes a single economy. I think that's a very exciting prospect. I think, especially for Web3 startups, like the fact that RWAs are catching up shouldn't be something like, oh, this is a mega funds and mega corps game now. Like us, the OGs, like been displaced. I think you should be excited about this opportunity because it means you get to play in a bigger stage. Well, yeah, what I feel like you want to interject something. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, it's like I came into the space in 2017, really, and went full time back in 2020. And what I have seen is that I fully resonated with like the DeFi days, or rather even the Bitcoin back in the day, with the OGs and saying like, hey, Bitcoin is the only asset that matters, right? Like any other assets out there is not going to be like valuable, right? And I disagree with that, right? If you look at what we're trying to build here is we're trying to build the next wave of internet of value, right? And if you look at the internet, I mean, anyone can use the internet. The internet is just a rail, right? Anyone can use the internet to do many different things.
Many different things. Yeah.
Many different things. You can use the internet to search for information. You can use the internet to purchase goods, right? And it can be like a whole wealth of different type of goods and services that you can do on the internet space. Now with blockchain, right, I see it as internet as well, right? So there could be applications or certain type of use cases that is very focused on one particular segment. But now we shouldn't constrain the underlying infrastructure to only that one segment. We should be as open as possible, right? And then from there, that's where we get more people into the ecosystem. And I was just chatting with someone yesterday. And if you look at like the monthly active users, right, on-chain monthly active users, you're looking at like mid to low 7 digits figures. And that's wallets. You divide that by, I mean, how many wallets do you own?
Ooh, like 7.
Yeah, you divide that by that amount, you're looking at a very small group of users. And those are I would term ourselves as the early adopters within the space, right?
Yeah.
But like the mass market, people know about it. Some of them get exposure to it via centralized exchanges. But if you want to do more useful things on chain, right, and what we term as building the global financial system, you have to do more, right? And by doing more means you need to have to be as open as possible, to have more use cases to be brought on chain, so you can attract people of different crowd. Like some people, like my friends out there, they are risk adverse, right? So they only want to get like steady yield, right? That you see in like less than, for example, 5% APY, less than 10% APY. And how do they get it? They look at, right now, if you look at our industry, we are only clouded by like high APYs, high returns, high risk, high reward, high returns type of, ethos. But that's not the case, right? It's only because like early adopters tend to take more risks, right? But as you want to grow this industry, you have to cater for the others as well.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think I'm sad you have to go soon because, otherwise we could keep going about this. There's a lot of things I wanted to ask you. To finalize the point about the universal economy, what more, let's say, esoteric outside of the institutional world use cases for this are you excited about? What are you personally following?
Yeah, I'm interested to see the developments on. So I mentioned tokenized stocks being one. I'm very excited to see more and more real assets being brought on chain, because right now we only really see like UST bills, right? And now as we get like a whole wealth of different assets, that's where you can do portfolio construction. So for example, portfolio construction. So for example, let's say like in the traditional Web2 space, one thing that I've been heavily bullish on is Robo-Advisory. Right. So Robo-Advisory basically is, and I use a Robo-Advisory called Endowers, right? What they do is I just park some funds with them, right? They will help me get exposure across the entire globe. With equities, bonds, and depending on my risk profile, they will give me exposure into basically either emerging countries or developed countries, or let's say, for example, like a US market, right, et cetera, et cetera.
Not even stuff like Bitcoin, right? If you're
absolutely.
Friendly enough.
What as a user, I don't need to know about the complexities. And most people, they don't. Like, most people, they don't want to know about the complexities of which instruments I invest in. All they want to see is I have X amount of risk tolerance, and I can, for this particular X amount of risk tolerance, I would get a rough band of APY, right? And it can fluctuate between that rough band, right? And what we do see right now on chain is as we get more and more of those assets onboarded, what we want to see, and what I'm very excited to see, is that now you have like basically on-chain strategies. People can start building products based on this whole wealth of different solutions and using stablecoins as a way to transact and get exposure into those funds, right? And the next level would be like, who would be the one that's doing all those rebalancing and whatnot? That's where AI agents come in.
Yeah, probably an AI,
Yeah, indeed. So I'm very excited to see how AI agents come into play together with more real-world asset type of offerings. And they are the ones that actually do the transactions rebalancing on and off-chain. As a user, I would basically just offer like what's similar of what we see in Robo-Advisory. Okay, there's like 3 options, right? Are you a low risk tolerance? Are you a medium risk tolerance or high risk tolerance? And I will allocate the funds accordingly that way. And that's what I find exciting, because that's what's going to bring the mass users on board. Like stablecoins, I'm very bullish on stablecoins, right? I think stablecoin is the first leg to get us there, right? And it's going to bring a lot of liquidity into and legitimacy into this industry, right? And bring more people on board. But frankly, people that stay here, they do not just want to hold stablecoins.
Yeah.
If you look at like the US equity market, right? People want to own some form of like a yield-bearing or capital appreciating asset out there. And that's really where I see the intersection and getting more mass users coming into this ecosystem.
And things can, like you say, like things are pretty complex right now. Like one point that I try to make in my conference talks is that crypto thought we needed scalability to reach the masses, alongside like you've seen the typical triangle like decentralization, security, and scalability. Really, we didn't. I mean, scalability is a part of it, but we really needed a good user experience, which was what was lacking there. And things like what you say are a part of bringing a user experience. I mean, we're doing so much to simplify chains by integrating things like CCIP or like universal accounts to automatically sort out the cross-chain complexities that are always going to be there. We just hope for them to be invisible. We integrate social login so that people don't need to store 12-word seed phrases below their couch. We integrate account abstraction so that the money can be programmable and you don't need to have so many clicks in every step of the way. And things like what you're saying, like, okay, now bring in AI to make the product simple, bring in products that are not as scary to use as like an Aave loan to the average folk. That's going to make a big difference. Is there anything we didn't get to cover that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think you covered exactly that. And I think those are improvements in our industry that we're going to make. And I'm very excited to see what Particle Network is going to do, right, in solving the space on the user experience side. What I do think is really important as well in terms of mass user adoption is while we solve for the UX UI layer, right, to onboard the masses, we also need to make sure that on the security layer that has never been compromised. And the reason for that
100%.
is we can onboard 1 million users, right? And if we onboard 1 million users and there's a security incident that happened,
And we rug all of them, we look real bad.
It will push back the adoption cycle significantly.
Totally.
And what people really want is they want like a safe and secure, right, basically infrastructure that they know that they can park funds in and have equal access to opportunities out there. So I think this is something that is maturing. We've seen that with price feed oracles back in the day, and we want to see that as well on the bridging side of house, because I think I have certain concerns with regards to certain like centralization risks within the bridging sector side of house. I think like just earlier 2 days ago there was an incident, but largely speaking, we want to minimize that to the minimum as possible.
Totally.
So that when we fix the UX UI problem, right, it's going to onboard users on a long-term basis. And that's what I'm really, really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna make like an off-color joke. I'm gonna save it for outside of the podcast. But yesterday I was talking to someone. Okay, I'm gonna make it. There's like a Paralympic event going on here in Seoul. I don't know if you noticed. So there's like a lot of people with like amputated arms, amputated legs that are participating in this thing. No, well, this is like sports people.
Yeah.
And the ongoing joke between me and my team is like, we tell these people that we're in crypto and they feel bad for us. And yesterday I was talking to the Spanish team because they were at the same restaurant, and all of them said the same thing. It was like, oh, I used to have some friends that did crypto, but then it didn't really pan out for them and they dropped it. And that's an argument I hear a lot. Like, that's a reason I hear a lot. Like, oh, I had my friend tried crypto for a while and then they got fucked. Like, a lot of times they're talking to prices, right? Obviously, a lot of times they're talking about investing. But there's so many cases of like people that had money on FTX, people that had money in Luna, people that had money in so many things. And like you're saying, these security incidents do like pull the rug from under people and make them set the adoption back for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was like an FTX user or a Mt. Gox user, if I would have wanted to come back to crypto after that happening to me. So definitely, like you say, it's very important that the security layer is top notch.
It's a joke, but not a joke at the same time. So I fully agree. I think on our side, that's one of the key reasons we focus that much on security, right? And not having any form of shortcuts within this entire industry. And only because of that, that's how you get the financial institutions on board. Because they have way more basically to lose, and they have a lot more compliance-related requirements to make sure that this never ever happens. And I think that's where like Chainlink is in a very privileged position right now, right? Where all the years of investing, right, in capital markets, our goal has always been we want to grow this space further so that the whole pie can be bigger and everyone wins at the end state, right? We like to win, right? If you have heard like Sergey's podcast, like he always emphasized that we want to win. Winning is our mentality here. And we win by growing the pie together across the board. And the only way for those new wave of capital allocators, institutions to do more and leverage the blockchain technology space is this underlying assumption where basically it's a secure space. The dApps that interact with are secure. And one of the key reasons why we decide to basically go through the process of having like our products being SOC 2 compliant and meeting the ISO requirements as well, right? So I do think that we're going to enter a new phase of growth, right? That enables people to have like, it's still going to be exciting in certain aspects, but in large aspects, it's not going to be exciting in a good way, right? And there's going to be more and more people that like is going to come into this space, right? Get access to different type of products that me and you might not even know about, right? But that's the end state. We want it to be like the internet. And
exactly.
I'm really excited. I don't know how best I can like show my excitement, but this is what keeps me going at Chainlink over the past 4 years because there's a mission statement behind, right? And we want to keep growing the pie.
That's why I keep saying to people, like, stop thinking about Web3 like as a parallel thing. Like the end state is to be like an evolution of the existing thing, not a wholly separate thing where like we're the weirdos that people feel bad for. Like you said, like if you're listening to this, well, first of all, like and subscribe, and second of all, stop being scared of the word compliance. Like, yeah, I think you've made a very good case of like why this compliance is necessary. In some cases, KYC and AML is gonna be necessary for these things to continue growing, and you're gonna see more and more people coming in, and that's a way to support them, and that's a way to make things safe for them.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hopefully
Carlos,
your
it's
legal
been
team likes that and that doesn't require me to cut too much. Thank you so much for coming, man. You've been a great guest.
Thanks, Carlos. Cheers.
Cheers.